the first time we spoke was back in 2018 when I was at NBC, and you came on and talked very openly about your own experience with concussions in the NFL. And you put the number at just thousands. You just said you thought you'd had thousands of concussions over the course of your career.
Well, I wouldn't have said that maybe a few years before you and I discussed it in I think 18. But I had a conversation with Dr. Benjamin Amalu, who in the movie Concussion many years ago, Will Smith portrayed Dr. Amalu, who actually discovered CTE when he was a coroner, I believe, in the city of Pittsburgh. And he had done these autopsies on what turns out to be 4 or 5, maybe Steeler players, former Steeler players, and discovered CTE. But in my conversation with him, I said, when is a good time to play tackle football? And he said, never. Which I thought was, I thought maybe he would say 21, 20. He said, there's never a good time for the human to play tackle football. But he said, I know that's not, that's never going to happen. But we got to the discussion. He said, how many concussions do you think you've had? And I said, 3, maybe 4. And he sort of chuckled and said, more like hundreds, maybe thousands. And I said, no, 3 or 4. And he said, well, how many times do you think you were tackled or you fell, you hit your head on the turf, and maybe your ears were ringing, or you saw stars or fireworks? You maybe were a little fuzzy, but you were able to play. You didn't come out of the game. You kind of shook it off. And I said, almost every time I was tackled or I fell. And so he said, well, that is a concussion. Everyone relates concussions to, you see a boxer get hit and his knees are buckling, or they look rubbery, his legs. A player gets tackled, he gets up and he stumbles back to the ground. We all know that's a concussion. And that's what I was relaying what I thought concussions from a numbers perspective was exactly that, where I may have blacked out for a period of time. And he said, yeah, that's a concussion, but we know that the fireworks or the ringing in the ears or the fuzziness is also a concussion. And he said, in the long run, the small minor concussions, if you will, and I don't think there is such a thing as a minor concussion, but he said those do the most damage over time. And that was a wake-up call for me to think that I've had hundreds, maybe thousands of concussions, which would be very accurate based on what he said. Is honestly, it's scary.
Right. I know in the film, it's very powerful, by the way. I watched it and it was gripping. The whole thing was gripping. It's an hour and a half. It's like you can watch it in a decent amount of time. It's not going to take your whole afternoon,
right?
But you will not turn it off and walk away. You will sit there and watch beginning to end. And it juxtaposes your story, Brett, with the story of Tyler Sash, who, you know me, I don't know that much about sports, and I didn't know Tyler's story, even though he played for the Giants, which is our team, my family's, well, not my current family. My husband's an Eagle fan, but my family of origin. And it's absolutely heartbreaking because he had an experience that I think so many American families, so many American boys have, which is you go into Pee Wee football, you play tackle, you move up the ranks. He was a star athlete. He was a star runner. He was a star baseball player, basketball player, and football player. But really stood out on the football field and was breaking records and so on and so forth. And then amazingly winds up getting drafted to the NFL, playing for the Giants. This is like so many little boys' dream. That's their dream.
Yeah.
And he didn't know the first thing about CTE, Brett, but unlike you, where, you're in your 50s, right? And you're like starting to realize there's some
Right.
signs of like, gee, I can't remember where my car keys are. He didn't really have somebody to make clear to him what was going on. Things started to deteriorate in terms of his behavior. Yes,
Correct.
memory, but also emotional regulation, to the point where his family around him was just utterly confused.
Right. Well, he became something that no one was familiar with. He was everybody's All-American, certainly in Iowa. He grew up as the most popular athlete, maybe in town. Went to the University of Iowa, was heralded there and was loved. Goes to the Giants and plays, and I think he played 3 or 4 years. But the thing about concussions that we do know, and by no means am I a doctor, but I think I can speak for most doctors relating to this field. They don't know a whole lot about concussions, but one thing that I've learned by being a part of this film, being an activist for concussions and safety, is that it only takes one concussion. You don't have to have multiple or thousands or hundreds of concussions to, for lack of a better term, go off the deep end. It can happen after one concussion, and that should scare a lot of people. So, I think at one time the thought was you have hundreds of concussions, you're likely to have something neurologically go wrong, short circuit at some point. But what we now know is that may be true with multiple or hundreds of concussions, but it also may be true for the person who had one. And so, as I've talked to people about this, I'd like to see the NFL. I think they've done a good job with rule changes. They've sunk a lot of money into equipment, helmets. But the thing about the human head that Dr. Amalu really is about as simple as he could explain it. He used a woodpecker as an example. And I really didn't know where he was going with it. I sort of laughed, but he said a woodpecker hits a pole or a tree constantly, never gets a concussion. Why? He said, because when the head hits the tree or the pole, the brain stops with the head. And he said, that's very important. And he said, it stops because it's sort of built in this cocoon or cork type enclosure. And he said, the human head, on the other hand, when the head stops, the brain keeps going. And he said, and then when the brain hits, the skull, that's when bruising occurs. And up until that point, I never thought about it. He said, so helmets, no matter how good they are, they don't stop the brain from moving. So when like my concussions, all were, I would say, from hitting my head on the turf. I call it the whiplash effect. You fall down, your head slingshots back, you hit the turf, the head stops immediately, the brain keeps moving. Mm-hmm. And he said, helmets will not stop the brain from moving. He said the human brain is, sloshing around in fluid. And when you hit something, a high impact, the head stops, the brain keeps going, we got big problems.
Did you know there's nearly $1 trillion of infrastructure and pandemic funds yet to be spent? Yes, that's right. There is a massive amount of dough that this lame duck administration is pushing hard to spend in its last few months. If the president is able to push these funds out, we could see another prolonged inflation surge, just like during COVID. But there's hope. A gold IRA from Birch Gold Group can be an inflation hedge for your savings in uncertain times. To see how to protect your IRA or 401k, get your free info kit on gold by texting the word MK to 989898. Birch Gold makes it seamless to roll over your retirement account while preserving your tax advantage status. Don't wait for the president's spending spree to potentially tank the dollar further. Protect your financial future right now. Text MK to 989898 for your free info kit from Birch Gold. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.